Hey warriors, welcome back. In today's video, I am taking on one of the questions that gets asked the most. I think we've all asked ourselves this question at some point in time. Should I quit my job without another job? Hi, I'm Nile Harris. I am a life strategist, business consultant, and speaker working with transitioning and growing entrepreneurs and professionals to break the habit of waiting and make the jump to pursue their passion and purpose with a plan. And today I am getting into some juicy details on should you quit your job without having another job. And before I get started, I would love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel, turn on the alerts so you know when I post new content, and join the discussion online at I'm Nile Harris at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and connect with me on LinkedIn, and let's dive into it. This question I think has come up in every person's mind who has worked for somebody else. I don't care if you are 16, 30, 45, 60, this question crosses our minds. In fact, I don't know if you remember this, or maybe you were too young to remember this, back in 2010 when Steven Slater made headlines by quitting in such epic fashion. He is the flight attendant on a Jetblue flight, I believe. Shortly after landing, I understand it was a particularly rough flight, and he got into disagreement with some passenger or a passenger, and having reached his breaking point, he grabbed the overhead and announced that he was done, followed by a string of profanities, and grabbed 2 beers from the beverage cart, activated the emergency exit slide, and slid right on out the plane. He became that day, I don't know about you, if you remember that, but he became sort of my secret hero. And I was thinking, wow, I would love to be able to do that. Now, I don't know if Steven can get another job after that, or if he has another job. He was arrested later at his home. So while it is not advisable that you quit in that epic fashion, we are talking about, should you quit your job without having another job? Now, if you are thinking about starting your own business, should you quit your job and jump into that right away? I did actually address that in a different video, and you can catch that link in the comments below. But if you are a side hustler and you do someday want to make that side hustle your main hustle, but you're not quite ready yet, should you quit your job without another job and hope to find another job, or just sort of go after that side hustle in a very unprepared fashion? So let's dive into it. Let me tell you, when it comes to quitting your job without having another job, I've done it 3 times. I'm still alive. I do not recommend it whatsoever. I advise against it, but I will get into when you could, or when you probably should at least strongly consider quitting your job without having another job. But I did it 3 times. So the first time I did it, I was returning to business school, or I was returning to school to go to business school. So I would say that doesn't really count. If you're going to something else, you're going to college, or you're going to some educational program, if that's why you're here, I think that's reasonable. If you are trying to decide if you're going to want to go to a graduate program, for example, and you're trying to decide if you should do it full-time or part-time, I wanted to go full-time. I wanted to have that full experience. If you're married and you have kids and you're wondering if you can do that, I had lots of classmates who had families, who had spouses, who came with a spouse, who came with children. I had some who had children while they were at the school. So if the struggle is between, should I quit and go full-time back to school, or do part-time school and still work full-time. That is a completely different discussion, but that was the first time I did that. The second time I quit without a job, I was frustrated with where I was with my employer, and I didn't think we shared the same values anymore. And I had made significant headway in securing another role, and I had done all the interviews, and I was fairly certain that I was going to get the opportunity, the number one opportunity that I wanted. But if not, I had cultivated other opportunities, and I wanted a couple of months off. It had been a particularly difficult time. I had a good friend, very good friend of mine, pass away, and on the day of her funeral, my father passed away, and I just needed time. This was a few months after that, and I just wanted a month or two of time, and so I was betting that that this offer would probably take about a month to come through, and so then by that time I would at least give myself 4 to 6 weeks. So it was a big bet, but I did end up getting that number one offer that I was going for, and so a little bit of risk, but not a lot of risk. If that is something that you're thinking about doing or approaching it that way, be sure that you have cultivated multiple opportunities, multiple potentialities for that next role, in case that number one, where you feel that you are the leading candidate, you never know what happens. Sometimes, I've been the leading candidate in lots of roles, at the same employer, at other employers, and then either the role gets put on hold, somebody else gets hired into that role. And you just never know. So if that's something you're going to do, if that's a jump you're trying to make or a risk you're going to take, be sure that you have cultivated a number of opportunities in case that number one spot doesn't come through. Now, the third time I quit without a job, I for real quit without a job. Like for real. Like, no, I had been looking for another job, and I had a prospect, and I had a couple of prospects, and there were strong prospects, good prospects, but not in the, stages of candidacy or stages of interviews that would have, like, as I was in that first time that second time I quit. And I had cultivated multiple potential opportunities, but these were probably months away from being actualized. Again, I don't recommend doing it, but it was a situation where it was a toxic environment. It was a toxic culture. I wasn't even the first or the second person. I was the third person to quit without a job. To sort of the first two walked out. I at least gave notice, and it was something where I needed, again, that sort of mental break. I did plan to some extent for it. I didn't just walk out. So if you're going to quit without a job, give notice. So it gives you opportunities for planning. I had been planning regardless, because I knew that this wasn't a good fit of an opportunity. And so also, in terms of looking for other opportunities, I bolstered up my side hustle of freelance consulting. So I already had an LLC. I already had some of that back office business operations, a logo, things like that. I already had a website. I already had that in place. I already had that locked in. So I knew that I was going to transition into doing freelancing while I looked for that next opportunity that really excited me, that sparked joy in me. And then as I was doing that, I found some contracts, and but then COVID-19, the coronavirus epidemic hit, and that kind of put a twist in things. But that's why we have to plan. So that's why I never advise just leaving a job without having another job. But when should you do it? When should you leave a job without having another job? And it really comes down to two things: legalities and the environment. And what I mean by legalities is, number one, if there are clearly illegal things happening, if there are things that are even sort of borderline or sort of shady, For me, that's like, I gotta go. I don't want to be a part of that. That's not who I am as a person. I don't believe that's the best way to make money. And I spent the majority of my career in highly regulated industries. So I started in financial services, highly regulated. If people are stealing or cheating, which does happen, playing funny with the money, you don't want to be a part of that. The second industry was medical device, healthcare, biotech, highly regulated by the FDA. So if you've got people cheating there, off-label promotion, things like that, you just don't want to be a part of that. You don't want to get entangled with that. Companies have been fined hundreds of millions of dollars for some of their more questionable practices. So if there are things that are, if you're in a startup or a large company, if there are things that are illegal or immoral going on, you might want to strongly consider, going ahead and leaving it, even if you haven't found that other job yet. Just taking time to make your plans as best you can. The second where you want to leave is where I was, and it was the culture. I went to the doctor for a completely mundane visit, just a regular visit, and the look of shock on the doctor's face and in the nurse's face, because my blood pressure was 170/110. It wasn't lifestyle. I don't have a terrible diet. Actually, very better than the average diet. Get plenty of water, get plenty of exercise, get plenty of rest. So there was no external reason like in that category to explain my blood pressure, but I knew what it was. I knew that it was this environment that I was in, and it was killing me. And for me, I became more afraid, and I couldn't really explain to you so much why I was afraid to leave in the first place. There were a lot of things at play there, but I became more fearful of who I would become if I stayed. I became fearful of shrinking myself, of that warrior spirit in me becoming smaller and smaller. And even though we never lose our warrior spirit, I worried that it might become extinct in me and that I would become somebody I didn't recognize. I am someone who's always sort of gone against the grain. The Nile River is, I think, one of 2 rivers that flows south to north. So I am the embodiment of my name. I've always been somebody who, even though I've waited too long to do something sometimes, I've always been somebody that does what a lot of other people won't. And I found myself in this situation, and I was fearful of losing myself. So that's, those are 2 things. There's some illegal activity, or the environment is just so toxic that it's going to kill you. It's going to take you out, and you're miserable. I was miserable. The people around me were miserable. My family and friends were tired of hearing about me being miserable. So those are 2 conditions under which you could quit your job without another job if you're not going back to school or starting your own business. So why isn't it a good idea to quit your job? One, you've got bills to pay. I mean, your financial obligations, that's fairly obvious. But some companies actually don't look on your gap in employment very favorably. If you recall, if you were in the workforce, or if you remember back in 2008, 2009, during the crisis, the housing crisis, and lots of people lost their jobs, there were lots of companies that would refuse to even interview or consider applicants if they didn't have a job. It would be right there on their website. When you would go to apply for a job, it would say in the requirements, or it would say at the top. And I'm talking about big companies, Fortune 500s. I'm not talking about moms and pops, I'm talking about companies that have tens of thousands of employees around the world would have on their website, do not apply if you don't have a job. And I don't actually understand where that whole thing got started, but it was so prevalent that then President Obama actually called on legislators and companies to do something about that. And companies needed to stop that. And then you had whole movements of people who would boycott products of those companies because of those policies that they had put in place. But even though that's not something that's necessarily occurring now, the gap has always been looked on as unfavorable. That's not necessarily something like, if I'm looking at a candidate, I've not noticed the gap, or if I ask about the gap, it's not a deal breaker for me, especially if you have an explanation for the gap. There's this notion that, we're born, we go to school, we leave, we get a good job, and then we work that job until we retire and die. And if you take a month off, if you take a year off to do something different, shame on you. I am always interested in people's stories, but unfortunately, not everyone is. So people will look unfavorably on that gap. So have a good explanation for it. If you quit, because of an environment, don't go negative. Don't talk about the environment. Simply say it wasn't a great fit, and I learned a lot from that experience. These are the 3 things I learned. And I carry that forward into my experience, in looking for a new job. But don't dwell on what happened in that last opportunity. Why it's also not a good reason, or good for you to quit a job without another job. And again, unless you have support in this, in that when you suddenly go from not having, going someplace every day, and then suddenly you have no place to go every day, and you're not filling that time, maybe, going on sabbatical or something like that. It can lead to mental health challenges. It can show, like, when people retire, depression goes up because there's this feeling of not being useful anymore, or not having that schedule anymore to keep you engaged and locked in. So if you do quit your job without another job, fill your day. If you have a side hustle, fill your day with your side hustle, and try to make that a main hustle if you can. Or if you want to keep it a side hustle, use it as a way to supplement income. Hopefully you've saved money when you left your job, and or take some classes, take some courses, learn some new things. I definitely did that during my first little mini sabbatical. I took some courses and some classes, and that side hustle that I had, I actually spent some time revamping websites and learning just some new skills during that time. So what if you've already quit? What do you do now? All the things that I just said. If you've already quit, get that network together. If you have a side hustle or want to start a side hustle, you can get started with doing some freelance work. Reach out to your network. Be sure that if you're trying to get to another opportunity, another job, be sure that your, things like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Indeed, that your resume is updated. I recommend keeping your resume updated. Even if you have a job that you love right now, go update your resume, because I believe in staying ready so you don't have to get ready. But, be sure that your resume is, up to date, but also within context of how resumes should and look and feel, and kind of what they look like now. I know that was one of the things that I had spent so long at a company, and even though I kept the content of the resume updated, I didn't keep the style and the format of the resume updated. And so when I went to apply to other jobs, my resume was very dated looking. The content was great, but it looked dated. So be sure that you're doing some research, or hire a resume writer if you can to help you with that. But don't panic. Please, please, please don't panic. I am living proof that if you pull the trigger of quitting without a job, that you can recover. It might take 6 to 8 months, sometimes a year, to find another job or another opportunity. And that's how I actually ended up making the jump into making my side hustle my main hustle, because I was looking for another opportunity that sparked joy. And I think I said it earlier that things in the economy and in the world happen, and unemployment right now is at an unimaginable high. And so I pivot. I believe in the power of the pivot. So I pivoted and made my side hustle my main hustle. But if that's where you are, please don't panic. Look at other jobs to help you. FedEx, UPS, Amazon, Starbucks, places where, driving for Uber, driving for Lyft, delivering, the gig economy is real, and people have made substantial livings and covered all of their bills by participating in the gig economy. And it will also show potential employers too that you did something in your gap. So if you were out of work for 6 months, but you can come in there and say, well, I did some freelance work and I drove for Uber and Lyft and I worked at Starbucks and I took in part-time work at FedEx, they should be impressed that you pivoted, that you could roll with the punches. If they are not impressed that you did what it took to thrive, not merely just survive, but to thrive and to learn some new things, and that's probably not going to be the best place for you. So that's it. This is a topic that comes up often, but here's what I would say about quitting your job without another job. Just don't be Steven Slater. Don't pull the exit the exit ramp and jump off the plane and grab 2 beers. Try to do it with grace and dignity. I wouldn't say I did it as gracefully as I would have wanted, but like I said, I did give notice. I didn't just walk out as maybe some other folks had, but that's it. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments. If you quit without a job, or if you have questions or advice for people who are thinking about doing it, please let us know. And subscribe to my YouTube channel, turn on the alerts, and join me online at I'm Nile Harris on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and join me on LinkedIn at Nile Harris.